I never thought my own brother would be the one to destroy everything our father spent 30 years building. My name is Robert, and until 3 years ago, I believed family meant loyalty, no matter what. I was wrong, and it took losing almost everything to understand just how wrong I was. Welcome back to Emotional Revenge Stories, and if this is your first time here, stay with me, because what happened in my family will make you question everyone you trust, and by the end, you will understand exactly why justice sometimes takes years to arrive, but when it does, it arrives completely. My father built a small hardware supply business from nothing. He started with a rented garage in Ohio and one truck, and by the time I was in my 20s, that garage had grown into a company with 40 employees and contracts across 3 states. He always said the business belonged to the family, not to him, and that one day, my brother Daniel and I would run it together. Daniel was older than me by 4 years, and everyone always said he had the sharper mind for numbers, while I was better with people, with clients, with keeping things calm when things got tense. We balanced each other, or at least, that is what I believed for most of my life. When our father got sick, everything changed faster than any of us expected. He was diagnosed with a heart condition that required surgery, and during his recovery, he asked Daniel and me to run things together, splitting responsibilities the way we always had. I handled operations and client relationships. Daniel handled the finances and the paperwork. It seemed fair. It seemed like exactly what our father wanted. I trusted my brother completely, the way you trust someone you grew up sharing a room with, someone who was there for every birthday, every holiday, every hard moment in our lives. I never once imagined that trust was being used against me. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you loved unconditionally, you already know how this feels. And if you are enjoying this story so far, please consider subscribing, because on this channel, we share real emotional stories about family, betrayal, and the justice that eventually finds its way to the people who deserve it. About 8 months into our father's recovery, I started noticing small things that did not add up. Invoices that were paid twice. Vendors calling to ask why payments were late when I had approved them weeks earlier. A supplier account that had suddenly changed its banking details without my sign-off. At first, I told myself it was a clerical mistake, because how could I even consider my own brother, the person managing our finances, might be doing something wrong? But the feeling would not leave me. I started quietly reviewing bank statements late at night after my wife and kids had gone to sleep, telling myself I was just being paranoid, just being overly careful because of everything our father had built. What I found broke something inside me. Over the past 8 months, nearly $200,000 had been quietly funneled out of the company through a shell vendor account that did not actually supply us with anything. The account belonged to a company registered under the name of Daniel's wife, Melissa. My own brother had been stealing from our father's company, from our family, while our father lay recovering in a hospital bed, trusting his sons to protect everything he had built. I confronted Daniel privately first, because despite everything, I still wanted to believe there was an explanation. I remember sitting across from him in his office, sliding the printed bank statements across the desk, watching his face for any sign of shock or confusion. Instead, what I saw was something far colder. He did not deny it. He simply leaned back in his chair and said that he deserved more than what our father had given him over the years, that I had always been the favorite, that this was his way of taking what was owed to him. I sat there stunned, because in one sentence, my brother had confirmed he had stolen from our sick father and felt entitled to do it. I want you to imagine that feeling for a moment. The person you shared a childhood with, the person who taught you how to ride a bike, who stood beside you at your wedding, looks you in the eye and tells you he stole from your dying father because he felt entitled to it. That kind of betrayal does not just hurt, it rewires how you see every memory you have of that person. I did not tell my father immediately. He was still recovering, and the doctors had been clear that stress could seriously harm his heart. So for the next several weeks, I carried this secret alone, trying to figure out how to protect the business, protect my father's health, and somehow contain the damage without breaking his heart completely. Daniel, meanwhile, acted as though nothing had happened. He came to family dinners, laughed with our mother, played with my children in the backyard, all while knowing what he had done. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from smiling at someone across a dinner table while knowing the truth about them, and I felt that exhaustion every single day. Things escalated when Daniel realized I had not reported him yet, and instead of feeling remorse, he became bolder. He started making unilateral decisions about company contracts, telling employees that he was now effectively in charge since our father was unavailable. He tried to redirect a major client contract, one worth nearly $500,000 annually, to a new company he and Melissa had quietly registered months earlier. When I discovered this, I understood that this was never just about frustration or feeling underappreciated. Daniel had been planning to slowly siphon our father's business into his own hands the entire time our father was recovering, using his trust and his illness as cover. If this story is resonating with you, and if you have ever dealt with a family member who tried to use your trust against you, drop a comment below and let us know, because your stories matter to this community just as much as mine does. I knew I had to act, but I also knew that going straight to our father with accusations, without solid proof, could destroy him emotionally during his recovery, and could also allow Daniel to manipulate the situation before I had everything documented. So I made a decision that still feels difficult to talk about even now. I began quietly gathering evidence, bank records, emails, text messages between Daniel and Melissa discussing the new company, contracts he had drafted without authorization. I worked with our company's accountant, someone who had been with my father for over 15 years and who trusted me completely once I showed her what I had found. Together, we built a complete paper trail proving exactly what Daniel had done, down to every transaction. During this time, my wife became my biggest source of strength. She reminded me every night that protecting our father and protecting the business our father had spent his life building was not betrayal, even though it involved exposing my own brother. She reminded me that Daniel had made his choices long before I made mine. Without her steady presence, I am not sure I would have had the strength to see this through, because there were nights I genuinely considered just letting it go, just walking away from the business entirely to avoid the pain of confrontation. But walking away would have meant abandoning my father, and I could never do that. The moment of truth came sooner than I expected. My father's doctor cleared him for light work, mostly reviewing reports from home, nothing stressful. When he asked to see the quarterly financial summary, I knew I could no longer hide what I had found. I sat with him in his study, the same study where he used to help me with homework as a child, and I laid everything out in front of him. The stolen funds, the shell company, the attempt to steal the client contract, Daniel's own words admitting he felt entitled to take what he wanted. I watched my father's face change from confusion to disbelief to a kind of quiet devastation I had never seen in him before. He did not yell. He did not cry, at least not in front of me. He simply sat in silence for what felt like several minutes, staring at the documents, before finally asking me one question. He asked if I was certain, completely certain, before he did anything about it. I told him yes, and I showed him every piece of evidence again, slower this time, answering every question he had. By the end of that conversation, something in my father had hardened, not out of anger alone, but out of a father's need to protect what remained of his family and his legacy. What happened next unfolded carefully and deliberately, because my father, even in his weakened state, was still the sharpest businessman I had ever known. He did not confront Daniel immediately. Instead, he quietly consulted with the company's lawyer, transferred full financial authority back to himself and the accountant, and legally secured the client contract Daniel had tried to steal before Daniel even realized his access had been cut off. My father wanted Daniel to fully understand the consequences of his actions, not through a shouting match, but through undeniable, documented reality. When Daniel finally arrived at the office one morning and discovered his financial access revoked, he stormed into our father's study demanding an explanation. What he did not expect was to find our father sitting calmly at his desk, the evidence spread out in front of him, along with the company lawyer present as a witness. My father spoke slowly and clearly, telling Daniel that he had built this company with his own hands so his sons could have a future, not so one son could steal from the other while claiming entitlement. He told Daniel that the stolen funds would need to be repaid in full, that his role in the company was terminated effective immediately, and that any further attempt to interfere with company contracts would result in legal action, regardless of the fact that Daniel was his son. Daniel tried every tactic in that room. He tried guilt, reminding our father of his health condition. He tried anger, accusing me of turning our father against him. He even tried playing the victim, claiming he had only done what he did because he felt overlooked his entire life. But for the first time, none of it worked, because the evidence spoke louder than his words ever could. Watching my father, still recovering physically but standing firm mentally, finally hold Daniel accountable was one of the most emotionally overwhelming moments of my life. Part of me still grieved the brother I thought I had, the one from childhood memories, while another part of me finally felt like justice, real justice, was happening in front of my eyes. Melissa's shell company was dissolved once the lawyer completed the paperwork, and the stolen funds were legally pursued through a structured repayment agreement, since my father chose not to pursue criminal charges for the sake of his grandchildren, Daniel's own children, who deserved a father even if that father had failed as a brother and a son. It was not the version of justice that feels satisfying in movies, but it was justice grounded in reality, the kind that forces someone to face the consequences of their choices while still allowing room for accountability rather than pure destruction. Daniel did not attend family gatherings for a long time after that. The relationship between us has never fully healed, and I don't know if it ever will. But my father recovered fully, both physically and in spirit, watching the business he built continue to thrive under honest hands. I took on a larger leadership role, this time built entirely on transparency, with regular financial reviews shared openly with our father and the accountant, ensuring nothing like this could ever happen again in silence. Looking back now, I understand that the hardest part of this entire experience was not discovering the betrayal itself, but deciding to act on it, despite how much it would hurt the people I loved. Protecting your family sometimes means standing against a member of that very family, and that is one of the most painful truths anyone can learn. But I also learned that silence protects no one, and that real love for your family sometimes means telling a hard truth instead of keeping a comfortable lie. If you have made it this far in the story, thank you for staying with me through something that was deeply personal to share. If this story affected you the way it affected me while living through it, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear that justice does eventually arrive, even within families, even when it takes years. And please tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were in my position, because every story shared in this community helps someone else feel less alone in their own family struggles. This has been another story from Emotional Revenge Stories, and I will see you in the next one.